Hey there, and welcome back to Transformers Rise of the Darkspark. As you recall, a while ago, I did a gameplay comparison between Rise of the Darkspark and Fall of Cybertron, which compared basic gameplay, weapon changes, and voice performances. And now, we're going to cover something I brought up back then, and that is a detailed comparison between the two base War for Cybertron Escalation maps, Remnant and Broken Hope, with their Darkspark counterparts. Now, I know for a fact that some changes have definitely been made, but I'm curious to see just how far Edge of Reality went with changes between games. Well, if you're ready, let's head in game and see what remnants of the original maps remain. Let's start off with Remnant, as it is based upon the first map in the Decepticon campaign. Let's also compare our starting sequences here. The Rise screen is a bit further back compared to the War one, but the general design is similar enough.
Escalation!
Our actual spawn position is a bit more centered in Rise, but then again, that just could be random spawn placement. But similar enough. Let's get our examination started with a detailed look at our current position. Okay, so here we have the original War map. The starting platform is pretty basic, but the space background is gorgeous. Oh man, look at that space. Oh, that is gorgeous. Now, let's check Rise. Okay, well, first and foremost, the ambient lighting on Rise is drastically different. War has a shiny gloss in the ground that is fairly neutral, maybe with a slight red tint from space. Rise has got a lot of purple and blue coming in here. Yeah, the atmosphere between games is drastically different. But both still have the WFC dropships, and Rise is missing some additional details on the ceiling. It's just got a diagonal beam going vertically across, whereas War's got some lights and miscellaneous paneling. Basic structure is the same, but definitely some more details in War. Let's continue to the center of the map. So here is a nice look at the center of the map in War. You really get a dark, desolate feel from this map. This place feels old and forgotten. And here we have Rise. And this feels so much different. This place now feels like it has been totally refurbished. You have some new purple glare coming down from the ceiling. Gives a completely different feel from the War map. And oh my goodness, there is a support that has been completely wiped out. Yeah, that front support that you have in War, completely gone in Rise. I guess they wanted to open the place up a bit. Looks like there's some other minor changes too. But again, basic design is about the same. Moving up for a higher angle, we get a nice look at the catwalks. Again, War feels very dark, very forgotten, very gloomy. And when we move over to Rise, feels totally refurbished. And it feels way more open. And there's like 2 supports that have been completely taken away. I can also see that Rise has taken the effort of adding cover for the AI to use. Makes sense? Let's head up for one last look at this central chamber. Same basic atmosphere that I've described already. And Rise... oh wow. Yeah, Rise is way more open. Some slight light changes, a lot more purple light coming through. Now this is where I've got to give a huge point to Rise, because you see, in the default base game, you cannot fight any Autobot flyers, as none have the possibility of spawning in on Remnant. And Rise, however, they have modified the map to accommodate them. There are now gaps in the ceiling where flyers can fly into the map and engage you. Or, well, at least try to fly in. Glitchy as that may be, I do appreciate Edge for making that adjustment. Well, that's all we have for the center chamber. Let's move back to the far rear of the map. So this area is pretty basic. You've got a grenade machine to your left, and a window to your right. With Rise, however... wow. it looks a lot more dull. Again, the basic design is still there, but Rise just has a generic-looking floor compared to the War paneling, which is far more distinct. Now we get to split paths. Let's start by checking the left side of the map. Starting with the first left chamber, we have the War version, which is a little beat up, but overall looks pretty good. Then we got Rise, which is pretty much the same as far as I could tell. Although, War has much more obvious damage on the floor that Rise doesn't really have a whole lot of. There's just like a black stain near the back. But the general design is pretty on point, I'd say. Obviously, since Rise has no unlockable doors, we're going to be missing a distinct part of the map here. Having the entirety of the map available to you at the start, it's just disappointing gameplay. There's no sense of progression. But I digress. Let's check out the exterior of this section. War has a busted open cargo bay that you can look at outside the window. That's some nice detailing for a very obscure part of the map. Rise, however, cheaped out. You have far less crates in the cargo bay. The busted catwalk is gone. Heck, I think there's an entire platform that was completely removed. And they didn't even bother putting a door at the back of the cargo bay. It's just a blank space that you can see out into the map. Yeah. Gotta give this point to War. This just looks so much more detailed and good. Well, let's move on to the next chamber. And here we have left chamber 2. You know, if I'm being honest, the War room feels really cluttered. I think there's too much detailing in the paneling here. All the floor and ceiling patterns just to make the room feel really messy. Let's see Rise. You know, I think I might actually prefer the Rise room over the War one. Yeah, the simpler texturing here actually really helps this room. Oh, and those blue lights really make for a gorgeous contrast with the rest of the room. I really like it. Yeah, this is actually a case where the simpler texture actually benefits the design. Alright, well, let's continue on to left chamber 3. Okay, so here is the War version, which again feels a little bit noisy in regards to the textures. And Rise, Rise feels, I don't know if I would say better. It's not quite as good as the previous room, but getting on topic again, War has a hologram in that left window, whereas Rise has just a simple core. Yeah, some minor detail adjustments here, but I like the atmosphere of War, but I like the simplicity a bit more in Rise. So combine those two together, beautiful. Right, let's move on to left chamber 4. Now here, the War one feels a lot less noisy. You have a much simpler texture on the ground that makes for a much more unified look. So already, this is better. And if we head over to Rise... Oh. Wow, we're really hit and miss here. Rise is actually missing some additional detailing that you get from War. Because War has those vents on the floor that make a nice separation all throughout. Rise don't got that. They just got like some fancy smanchy pattern in the center, which isn't doing a whole lot for me. But War looks good. I like it. Additionally, War has some energon spills on the left that Rise does not have. There is a busted up lift that we'll take a look at in just a moment, though I'd say War is better because the darker atmosphere combined with that detailed flooring make for a much better appearance. Now, let's take a closer look at that broken lift. So this is where we're going to find a really substantial change. War, as you can see, has a broken door blocking access to that lift. Rise, however, has a barrier with just a little bit of debris left over. It's even had the height increase, so this is a pretty substantial change. I like this a bit more. I know I'm going back and forth here, but this section in particular, I like more in Rise. You can see more of it, and the barrier creates a nice contrast with the rest of the room. Yeah, the War section just looks like a simple hole that somebody forgot about. But Rise looks like it had a bit more thought put into it. That's ironic. In general, this room is better in War, but this section in particular is better in Rise. Wow, this isn't as clear-cut as I thought it would be. Alright, let's move on to Left Chamber 5, the last chamber on this side. So here we have Left Chamber 5, and we're back to feeling noisy again. Make up your mind, game. Way too much paneling and detail for my liking. And Rise... And Rise looks too simple. War has too much detailing. Rise doesn't have enough. Nobody's a winner here. Let's move down a little further for one last look at this section. War is a little less noisy, but still kind of a bit off for my liking. Rise... Rise feels maybe just slightly better. Not by much, but just slightly better. Well, I can see the styles of barriers have changed. War has a red one with some crazy shapes going on in it. And Rise just has a simple barrier styling. I'd say I like the Rise room just a little more. Not by much, but just enough for me to have a verdict. Okay, that's it for the left side. Let's switch on over to the right side. Here we have Right Chamber 1, which looks... maybe a smidge noisy. Not nearly as bad as some of the other spots I've seen, but just enough for me to be a little bit irritated. Then we have Rise. Okay, first impressions, I like Rise just a bit more. The inclusion of that transparent power core in the center, nice touch. I dig it. You also have some nice red glare coming off those lights, which make for a pleasant contrast. Yeah, that war column is just dull and simple. But the Rise one, I like it. Yeah, this point goes to Rise. Alright, let's progress onto Right Chamber 2. So the War room is, again, feeling pretty noisy. There's just too much detail going on in that floor. If the floor were simpler, this wouldn't be so bad, but it's just too much for me. Whereas Rise... better. That tile flooring does improve things a bit. Looks like they ditched that column for another crate again. Yeah, in general, I like the Rise room a bit more. The style of flooring they're going with helps a lot. Not too much else to mention otherwise, so let's proceed onward to Right Chamber 3. And flipping everything I just said on its head, we have the War room, which looks gorgeous. Oh my word, this room is beautiful. You have a gorgeous contrast of light and dark here. You've got some spilled energon on the ground. You've got a energon waterfall or broken energon system on the right, and you have this gorgeous nebula light coming in. Oh, this room is beautiful. It's not too noisy at all. It looks beautiful. And let's have a look at Rise, which... wow. My disappointment is immeasurable. This looks so boring. What happened? This looks just like a room that somebody decided to, hey, I'm gonna cut this wall out and leave it at that. Rise may have done better with the first two rooms, but this War room trumps everything I just said, because this is gorgeous. Oh my gosh, I love everything about this. Well, I'd love to stop and stare at this beauty all day, but we gotta move on. Let's open up right chamber number 4. Here we have right chamber 4, which again is looking pretty darn good. Not quite as good as the previous room, that's gonna be hard to top, but still substantially better than past rooms. Texturing isn't too noisy, and you have that gorgeous space light coming in. And let's see if Rise has improved. No, it has not. So, between the tile flooring they went with, and the complete lack of any life and space whatsoever, it just makes this room look so dull. I mean, go back to War. You get that orbital debris with that beautiful nebula light coming in, and that War flooring just looks so much simpler and blends beautifully. I could have probably forgiven this if it at least had that decent space light instead of this dull red void you have, which is lifeless and stupid and boring, and I hate it! This is really going back and forth, isn't it? Well, we have one more room to cover, so let's open up the final right chamber. Okay, so the war room is decent. Doesn't look too terribly noisy. It's really the floor that decides if a room is really noisy looking. If they had kept to the simpler metal pattern, probably wouldn't have had a whole lot to complain about. As it stands, this room looks decent enough. And how does Rise look? Ooh, not too shabby. You may not have the luscious nebula that you do in War, but I think you get some decent lighting in the main room to kind of counteract that. I like the interior portion in Rise more, but I like the exterior portion in War more, so I'm gonna call this a draw. I think this one balances out pretty well. And we have one last section to check out, and that is this area. We got a room lit up by the red tinted screens. Not too terribly noisy. Looks alright. How about Rise? Much more simplified. Okay, yeah, the Rise version is much more dull looking. War's got those extra screens and wall detailing that you don't get in Rise. And the tile flooring is just a bit too much for my liking. But then again, I do like that bright purple glow coming in from outside, so this is a bit of a toss-up. I'll give this room specifically to War. I think there is much more detail going on here compared to what you see with Rise. So that's another point for War. So, final verdict. Which version of the map is better? We've gone back and forth on it a lot of times. There are some areas where War did better. There are some areas that Rise did better. But, in the grand scheme of things, who won? The answer is War. Right chamber number 3 is too bloody beautiful to disregard. When a single room is that good, it trumps any negatives I may have covered. There were some noisy rooms, but that room alone wins this level. Okay, that was Remnant. That was actually pretty interesting. But we have one more map to do, and that is Broken Hope. I sure hope it isn't as broken as this comparison was. Okay, so here we have Broken Hope. The startup screens are pretty different this time around. War has a higher angle looking down, and Rise has a lower angle looking up, but still generally facing the same location. And upon startup, we are facing totally different directions. In War, we start facing to where that Megatron hologram shows up, but in Rise, we're facing backwards, toward that opening. Okay, well, some substantial changes already. Let's get a more in-depth look and see what's going on here. Let's start with the front center of the map. War's got a pretty simple thing going on here. Got some nice shadow play at work here. Nothing too eye-popping just yet, but You know, we've only just started. And Rise... Huh. Interesting. Rise has certainly received some substantial architectural changes, I'll tell you that much. Well, first and foremost, I see that central saucer has been moved up higher in Rise. Kind of makes it look a little better, to be honest. And, okay, I'm gonna be honest. A lot of War's textures kind of blend together, but Rise is giving me a nice contrast here, where everything kind of stands out a little more than it does in War. It doesn't have as much shadow play as you see in War, but I kind of like how Rise looks. But we've only just started. It could get a whole lot worse, so let's continue on and see what else changes. Next, we have the lower left path of War. It's got a pretty desolate, destructive look to it. We even got some Autobot tank debris in the middle there. I think there's still a bit of a clutter with the textures, but it's a little better than the first section. How does Rise look? Ooh. Okay. Feels like things might have been moved around a bit. Definitely a few textural changes that I can see. Looks like they added a few objects for cover. The tank is completely gone. Looks like there's a knockdown glow light of some kind. I like the lighting of the War map, but I like the texturing style of the Rise map. So I'm gonna give this point to Rise, just because I like the textural look a bit more than the lighting. Let's move up a smidge further and turn to our right, and we can see the underneath section, which looks a little better, just upon a first glance. The textures don't look quite as cluttered as they did in previous sections, and we got some pleasant shading balancing it out. How does Rise look? So Rise has added a little bit of rock texture to the entrance here, whereas War has some unique panel lining. War also has some chevrons pointing inside. Okay, this one is easy. War is better here. War's got some great shading here that just really pulls things together for me. Those dark shadows combined with those bright ceiling lights just make for a pleasant sight. Compared to Rise, which is just pretty much all bright. Yeah, you got a point for War here. This looks good. Now, let's head out and around and check the main front floor. So, the War section is super dark. I don't really have any texture complaints here, so it looks pretty good. How about Rise? Oh boy. Wow. Rise has added a boatload of cover. And it's also pretty bright here, compared to the dark shadow section of War. The gate has changed up a bit too. It is a red barrier in Rise, but a fancy purple thing in War. I do kind of like some of the extra cover that Rise added, but even then I think they added a bit too much. Whereas War, I really like that shadow thing War's got going on here. Considering how dark it is, you don't really get any texture anomalies. Yeah, I like how War looks. Let's continue our journey around by checking this underneath section. So War, it's got some more shadow play going on here. Some nice glare shining through. Energy barriers going through those beams. Looks pretty good. Rise. Wow, they changed things up a lot here. The texturing style is completely different with the inner sections. You don't have those fancy beams anymore. You just have some simple object inside. I mean, the Rise room is okay, but War's lighting and those extra details on the inner portions of that wall win it for me. So this is another point for War. Next we have the rear lower section. We got some nice glows going on here. Got some blue from that dispenser, red from those signs, and orange from that computer screen. I'm noticing that War is really making an emphasis on light play, and that seems to be its greatest asset so far. But let's see what Rise is doing. That's it? That's freaking boring, man. Okay, this is a point to war. I'm not even gonna waste time on this. Moving on. Now we have the rear section of the map. And War, again, is making huge emphasis on that shadow play. And it's already looking quite nice. I think that starting scene was just an isolated incident because I haven't had any more complaints since. Okay, got a nice look here. What has Rise done? Wow, totally different feel here. Again, Rise is much more cluttered with all those objects added for cover. Not nearly as dark as the War map, and it also feels much more beat up than the War version. But now I'm starting to see a texture clutter here, whereas with War, you've got that dark shadow taking up the left side, and you've got those little dark energon crystals that just make a nice pop to the rest of the map. Okay, another point to War. Let's keep going, there might be some more distinctions elsewhere. Here's another angle of the same section. Again, got another huge emphasis on light play, especially with how those bright sign lights contrast with the darkness. Such a nice touch. But what does Rise do with this? Loses it all in brightness. Okay, good to know. Moving on, we have a direct look at the rear, which has a really good balance of lighting here. And Rise, you just lose so much of the atmosphere by brightening the map up. And all that cover just seems to become obnoxious, if you ask me. Well, it looks like the train wreck has been somewhat moved. I think the bridge was moved up slightly, by the looks of it. Yeah, there's a slight change going on there, but in general, I gotta give this to War. That lighting is just too good to ignore. Rise was off to a false start, apparently. Okay, that's it for the rear section. Let's move up and head inside. Starting with the rear upper right section, we have the War Room, which looks okay. Again, really getting emphasis from that shadow play. Well, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but the shadow play helps it quite a bit. What does Rise do with this? Wow. Okay, it loses a lot of that atmosphere by brightening it up again. Yeah, because that dark ceiling in War really helps with the atmosphere. By brightening it up, Rise has the exact opposite effect. It's pretty much the same room except for some additional areas of cover, and it is substantially shinier, but War just has a better atmosphere compared to what Rise is doing. If Rise had been a lot darker, probably would have turned out a lot better. But as it stands, it's not really doing it for me. Let's head around to the opposite side to check the other room, which, whoa, really got some light play going on here. It's a really dark room with some nice light shining down from the top. Got those nice, a few bright glow points to spice it up. And I'll bet Rise has brightened it up to the point where it looks ridiculous. Yep, it has. Okay. Wow. Doesn't even have that central terminal and has made it into a big block of cover. Ugh. Yeah. Wow. That brightness here has just killed it. I mean, look how good this looks in War. That contrast between the dark and the light is just too good. Well, there's not really anything else worth mentioning in here. Let's head out and head inside into that main building. So here we have the interior of the main building. Again, got a huge emphasis on light play. Got a very nice dark shading here, with some more light shining down. It looks good. How has Rise desecrated it? Quite badly. God, they made this level way too freaking bright. You lose so much of the atmosphere by doing it this way. And to make matters worse, they even got rid of those transparent barrier sections on the floor and replaced them with a stupid generic floor panel. Ugh. You could have at least left that. But no. Just throw some more cover in there and call it a day. Ugh. Yeah, apparently Rise was definitely off to a false start, because War is more than making up for it with its exceptional use of shading. Yeah, there's really nothing else of note to mention here. So, let's close it off with one last stop. The upper left interior, which, ooh, boy, got some really bold glows going on here. Look at that. This is a crazy dark room that is crusted with dark energon crystals on the outside. This is nice. And I'm already preparing myself for how bad Rise is going to wreck it. Yep. This is just a generic room with nothing special about it at all. They changed a few interior design pieces, but who cares? It's brightened up and boring. If you're gonna have generic textures like this, you gotta at least have decent lighting to compensate for it. Which you didn't do. Yeah, they didn't even keep those bright red objects there. And that's what's making this room, along with the dark energon crystals. Yeah. Again, they threw more cover in the center. Seems to be their solution. Brighten it up, add cover. That's this level in a nutshell. We're done here. War's the winner. We're done. Okay, so, in conclusion, War is superior in both counts. And even though Rise did a little bit better with Remnant, it absolutely broke with Broken Hope. Because they just abandoned any sort of dramatic shading that War had and made it look generic as heck. But that thus concludes my War for Cybertron and Rise of the Darkspark map comparison. This was way more interesting than I expected. I knew there would be some substantial changes, but I didn't expect it to go to this degree. War has drastically surpassed it. Well, with that done, I'm gonna throw a question out to you. Would you like to see a comparison of the Fall Escalation maps with their Rise counterparts? I don't think it'll be nearly as substantial as we saw with these, for obvious reasons. But I'm curious. Would you want to see that? Might just be a waste of time? I don't know. Let me know. If you do, I'll do it. But for now, I'm going to call it here and leave you with this glorious shot. Pause this video and stare at it for a couple minutes. Take in its lustrous beauty and breathe it in. Alright, I'll see you in the next one later.